What up, what up, what up? This is OXSF84 here again to put you on more science fiction. Today, we got to talk about John Scalzi's recently wrapped Interdependency trilogy. John Michael Scalzi II is an American science fiction writer, critic, web blogger, and the 28th president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. His career kicked off in the 90s when he self-published his first novel, Agent to the Stars, for free online. I'm talking AOL Instant Messenger days. And it was sort of the proverbial mixtape that ended up landing him a mass publication deal in 2005. After getting picked up by Tor, Scalzi went on to rock the very foundations of contemporary science fiction with his 2006 military epic, Old Man's War, a novel that took several cues from Heinlein's 1959 classic, Starship Troopers, and brought those thematic fundamentals into the 21st century with style and grace. The novel would eventually go on to pick up a Hugo nomination and take the #1 spot in every important reader poll that matters, pretty much ending up on everyone's top 10 science fiction books of all time. Seriously, ask any science fiction reader who thinks they know what they're talking about. Old Man's War is on their top 10, trust me. Needless to say, in one fell swoop, Scalzi cemented his place in the halls of science fiction forever. In the years following, Scalzi would continue to put in work on this beloved series, dropping Ghost Brigades in 2006, The Last Colony in 2007, Zoe's Tale in 2008, and Hugo nom after Hugo nom after Hugo nom after Hugo nom. It wasn't until Scalzi broke away from the series that he was able to pick up the big H for his 2012 novel, Red Shirts, a Star Trek parody that took a satirical look into the lives of the expendable crewmen aboard spacefaring adventures. Fun facts. Scalzi was also the chief entertainment media critic for PlayStation Magazine from 2000 to 2006. Dope. He also contributed heavily to Uncle John's Bathroom Reader. Yeah, I guess he and my pops would probably get along. In 2009, Scalzi was a creative consultant for Stargate Universe. I was also surprised to read about his connection to the Pulitzer Prize-winning literary titan Saul Bellow, who was his thesis advisor during college. It was noted that Bellow was only briefly his thesis advisor, but I don't know. There's something there. In any case, with all of this acclaim, success, status, Scalzi managed to finesse a $3.4 million deal with Tor Publishing back in 2015, a deal promising 13 books across 10 years. The first of which was The Collapsing Empire, which begins the Interdependency series and the topic of today's review. The first novel, Collapsing Empire, was pretty well received for the most part, collecting a Locus Award for Best Science Fiction Novel, and he even picked up another Hugo nomination. Yes, just another nomination. He was edged out by N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth at the time, so an honorable defeat. But it marked the start of something new for Scalzi, a fresh new series that felt like a return to form. The second book, The Consuming Fire, dropped in late 2018 to equally positive reviews. The closer, The Last Emperor, was just released last month and was widely considered a great end to a solid trilogy of novels. And with the public and critic assessment, I would have to agree. I think Scalzi here weaves together a impressive space opera that doesn't overstay its welcome and is overall an enjoyable reading experience. Forever the student of the Golden Age, Scalzi is a skilled practitioner of parody and pastiche. His whole MO has always been, unapologetically, intergalactic politics and raising those tough questions. And the Interdependency trilogy here is no different. The series revolves around a cosmic anomaly known as the Flow, an interstellar network of streams that allow faster-than-light travel. If you're into the hard science of it, Scalzi combined the concept of the Alcubierre warp drive and brain theory to form the basis of how the Flow works. Pretty cool stuff. In any case, the Flow is how and why our story takes place. The Flow has single-handedly allowed humanity to expand into a 1,000-year empire across 46 star systems that each rely on each other for resources. It's all a futuristic system of checks and balances, and the Flow is what makes it all possible. And therein lies the problem when it is discovered that the flow streams are beginning to collapse. Hence the name of the first book. We got some main characters here, a scientist, a token potty-mouthed starship captain, and the leader of the known universe, who is tasked with convincing society that there's an environmental threat to humanity's very existence. Basically, she's on some Al Gore shit. Scalzi has mentioned in his acknowledgments that the Interdependency was his first attempt at deliberately going for a trilogy. Avoiding the pitfalls of what happened with Old Man's War, here he does a good job balancing the narrative across 3 novels. The plot isn't particularly complex, but it isn't a weakness, as Scalzi seems to focus more on pacing and character development. Altogether, the storytelling here is efficient, off the backboard fundamental. It isn't bogged down by chapters of exposition, with the exception of the first leg of book 2, I would argue. And it remains fairly unpredictable, unless you're the maniacal fan theorist type. The political intrigue is there, for the most part. Lots of backstabbing, friends becoming enemies, enemies becoming friends. But it wasn't the kind of backstabbing that had me pulling my hair out or calling my mom and telling her how much I love her. It was just good. Talking about the words on the page, Scalzi pushes a brash, in-your-face, quippy writing style that feels like a well-spoken dude at a pub telling you about space and stuff. It's almost just like, here are these damn people in their damn spaceships traveling through damn space and time. It's easily what makes Scalzi's work so accessible. And that's not to say that he panders too much, or that he does any kind of narrative hand-holding. It does come across genuine for the most part. And it ultimately does wonders for his pacing, unlike so many writers who tend to let their prose get in the way of story. He's been described as funny, though I personally wasn't laughing out loud while reading this book. I found his attempts at humor pretty much just amusing for the most part. It's funny-ish, it's kind of that, why don't you take your spaceship and shove it up your ass kind of humor. But it does serve to ground the story with some real-world familiarity, so I get it. Some things that I didn't like so much, I do wish his writing were just a little bit more descriptive. While I'm certainly grateful for how efficient the writing here is, I do wish it would take in at least a few moments to fill in some details and really breathe life into the world building. The concept, the setup, the location, they're all put together very nicely, but as a whole, I think the resolution sort of suffers from a lack of imagery. It's all this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, which is great for pacing, but not so good for my imagination. And this is important to note when we're talking about scale, because there isn't enough detail in the culture, there isn't enough detail about the lore, the history, it's hard to feel what we stand to lose, and it's a little difficult to calibrate the stakes. I feel like we're just kind of taking Scalzi's word for it that this is all a big deal. He seems to do a lot in the way of telling and not much in the way of showing. I'd like to know more about the individual star systems, the local politics of individual planets. Give me some brief taxonomies on climate, on biology. What do the citizens do on a daily basis on all of these worlds? Everything seems to stay on this interplanetary scale when I think a much stronger narrative would toggle between the micro and macro in terms of world building. Talking about the dialogue, because Scalzi's writing style is so strong, line by line, I'm sure many people would argue that his dialogue is incredible. But it's actually probably my biggest criticism of Scalzi's writing. Personally, I think his incapability of subtlety is most apparent in the dialogue. Now, I have to say up front, his characters are not flat. The decisions they each make mark a unique development. But in terms of what's said, there are definitely times when they all kind of sound like the same person, with the exception of one character whom you'll come to know very quickly should you decide to pick up the series. She's kind of hard to miss. Another fairly nitpicky thing, the story makes some concessions for the sake of plot. For example, the justice system in this universe is practically identical to ours. I know it was probably a rhetorical decision, but it's hard to imagine a society 1,000 years in the future having a justice system identical to ours. Not a deterrent, but it did briefly take me out of the story. But to sum things up, the Interdependency series is a better than decent entry into Scalzi's catalog of fun-to-read space operas. Scalzi brings us exactly what you would expect: interspace politics, down-to-earth characters, golden age societal commentary. I love the ideas here. The notion that humanity is cripplingly dependent on a finite resource is a shamelessly heavy-handed indictment of real-world attitudes towards things like climate change or resources. but also civilizations being at the economic mercy of decisions made by their ancestors who couldn't possibly predict the problems of the future. But that said, if you're just getting into sci-fi, I would be remiss to recommend this series before Old Man's War, which is the better read, lexiconically speaking. But the Interdependency series is still a pretty dope trilogy, whose themes and topics couldn't possibly be more timely. Seriously, it's kind of eerie. Easily one of the better trilogies to recommend in recent past. But what did you think? The discussion begins in the comments below. Please leave your brief or lengthy takes for my reading pleasure. From Tokyo, Japan, it's your man, Yoroshiku onegaishimasu. And as always, keep reading. Thank you.